Hi, good morning. Vinnie Fisher here. I wanted to stop and talk today about the idea of servant leadership. A dear friend of mine, Jeff Bove, says all the time, if servanthood is beneath you, then leadership's always going to be above you. And I've really embraced that in my career. I love that. He's one of my dear friends, and he's always teaching on that principle about being a servant leader. And I want to take a few minutes and describe the idea and framework of the benefits of servant leadership and what are a few ways you can embrace this concept and also address issues in your organization where you don't have it. See, I believe that, like Peter Drucker says, culture will always eat strategy. I'm a growth strategist. I really love thinking about business. I love to grow it. I like the ideas around like how to help the consumer and expand an organization. I just think about that all the time. But over time, one of the things I've realized is that building out a dynamic team with a world-class culture is always going to outpace my growth strategies. It's just the reality of it. I've learned that multiplication always beats addition. And so I'm a big believer in servant leadership. And I think that the idea that this is a new concept is not really true. I think it's a lost concept more than it's a new concept. Scripture says that, he must become greater, I must become less. Well, that principle plays well in an organization. It's timeless because if I can become less as the leader of the organization and the organization can become greater, then it's bigger than me and it's going to have a greater impact beyond the shadow that I cast on the organization. And so servant leadership is one of the critical components to being able to have a dynamic culture. And I'd love to walk you through like 7 things that I think about that are problems and with solutions around this idea. And so I gotta be real. The first one has always been one of my hardest things in leadership, and it's active listening and the challenges in practicing active listening. I've always, because I've had an idea, I'm quick to act. I would always be ready to give a solution or an opinion to something. And that would push out highly active people wanting to provide good answers or at least an opinion in our organization. And so I think the difficulty in being a leader who is driven, who wants to push the organization is to learn how to listen to others. And there's an avenue, a trick that I was taught by Chris Voss, a great book, Never Split the Difference. Well, he and I were on a podcast together once, and he said to me, Vinnie, there is a real secret to active listening, and it's being a better question asker. And I'm like, all right, Chris, what do you mean by that? He's like, and you can learn about this in his book, which is an amazing book. I highly recommend. But what he said was take someone's statement in active listening and take their last little bit of that statement. He would say the last 3 words and turn it into your next question. Well, it was genius. And of course, he's a super smart guy, but I started just doing that practice in our organization. And I started hearing things like, oh my gosh, Vinnie, you are an amazing listener. You are so engaged. And I gotta be honest with you, I would never accuse me of being an amazing listener. Just ask Debbie. She'll tell you, it's something I've struggled with mightily in our marriage and our friendship. And I'm so thankful for that. And it's really, really worked well in our organization. The second problem that I really want to address is this idea of empathy and how to actually have it and overcome the lack of it. As a driven person and someone who's always charging towards a result within the organization, I can be accused of running too fast, not being there for our people. Well, that used to be an old excuse about me that I would be so focused on the customer, so focused on the result that I would chew through our people. The reality is in active listening, as you start to pay attention more to your people and you give them room, and a principle that I've taught in leadership about multiplication is around this 70% rule. You got to give them room to grow. Let's just assume if you want to know more about that, go back and watch our video on the 70% principle. I highly recommend it. But when you think through this idea of empathy, it requires what I said in the first problem, an active listening. You got to get to know your people. But when you start to do that, you're going to hear real things. And applying empathy, sympathy, compassion in leadership is such a critical component to being a servant, because you're putting the needs of others, you're laying down your own rights, and you're serving the people on your team. And so it must become greater, you must become less. This idea that your culture and your people become a high priority, well, empathy, understanding, and hearing and listening will lead to a natural component of being able to connect to where they are in the workplace. You have feelings that will mimic and react to some of those things, and you'll be able to understand some of their journey. Remember, helping him, it's their journey, not your journey. And so we talked about this idea of being a good listener, an active listener, and how you would then start to hear and learn things about your people. Well, that's walking in their journey. And so when they start to embrace that in the mission of the organization and the friendships and the culture that start to build deep, it becomes bigger than even just that person. They start to be missionally minded. And you can see how that stacks on top of itself. Well, we spend a lot of time together in work, right? We are really bound together in a work environment because, I really believe in the teaching that you work 6 days and rest on the 7th. And it was modeled for us that, we really should be on mission helping to solve the needs of the many. And are we doing that in such a way that we're helping others? Well, I think in society we might have that leisure kind of help others equation a little upside down. And so since you're going to be spending so much time together in work and helping others, you're going to learn a lot of things about each other. And, people bring their pain into every aspect of their life. And actually, a good litmus test to a healthy culture is that you know about personal pains that exist within your team. In our organization, people come to me mostly for personal stuff and not so much about leadership, organizational things. And you'd say, wait a minute, Vinnie, you're a leadership expert. How is that even possible? And I would say to you, it's possible because I invest in the person, give them room. And then as I do that, to lead and help them lead and help them develop some wisdom and intuition, they come to me with their real issues, the things that are holding them back from being able to do that. And so when you stack together active listening, having an ear and sympathy towards empathy, you start to really understand that you are kind of a servant leader who's helping others in the active journey of healing their wounds. See, the reality is, I believe what John Maxwell says, the law of the lid, you can only go as far as you're capable. And that's true of every leader in every spot. So one of the things that I think is super critical is helping people heal from the wounds that are holding them back for a bigger, more dynamic impact that they can help others in the marketplace. All of this is a critical piece to this idea of awareness. If you're really an active listener and you have all these other attributes going on, you're going to be aware. You're going to be present. And this isn't a one and done thing. I wouldn't say that the next thing becomes someone starts to do this, I did this, and then you fall away from it. And so it's a challenge as an organization grows and become dynamic and you're handing off authority to others to lead. It becomes a challenge to the idea that how do you stay actively engaged in that? How do you maintain awareness? Well, you got to be around. You got to listen to the conversations. You got to listen for the things in your active listening that are organizationally aware in your constantly changing environment. I think you can do that really well, and it allows you the opportunity to be there in decision making. And so I try to find myself in the crevices. I find myself in the spots where our leaders are challenged with making decisions that really challenge character. Because I believe in either good or bad character. It's just not character. It's either good or it's bad. And I do believe that your character will ultimately define your destiny. And so as leaders, we're challenged with making decisions. And so how do I find myself in a place and be aware and listen to the conversations such that I can help our team with making decisions that withstand the test of high integrity? And so that's one of the ways I stay very active in leadership, by giving them room, is to be around listening to decisions. I think to be really good at leadership, multiplication specifically, you have to be good at addressing the challenge of persuasion. Now, I want to stop here for a second, because most people, when I teach on this subject, will shut down on me a little bit, because they'll hear manipulation and they won't hear it correctly. That persuasion is not manipulation. Persuasion is conveying kindness, the fruits of the Spirit that would allow for me to see the person, help and convey for them with intuition, good wisdom, proper leadership principles. Persuasion is just really at its basic thing, conveying a statement, maybe even an argument, a compelling one that would help someone to consider and maybe even change their mind and help them be excited about heading in a direction they haven't even considered. Manipulation undermines persuasion, because manipulation undermines truth. It undermines character, integrity. And so I think that bad company can corrupt good character. And so I think one of the things I have to do constantly as a servant leader, not only maintaining self-awareness, but pay attention to persuasion, not only from my own lips, because out of the mouth flows the heart. What am I saying? What am I doing? Am I using encouraging, uplifting words that are helping to persuade others to see the value in our people, in our culture? Or am I using lying lips and held accountable for that? Well, that same thing translates through our organization. And so that's what a servant leader does. She's responsible for helping to be an ambassador to the quality of the organization. And so as a result of that, you're going to have an amazing culture if you really embrace that. And so a couple last principles I think are super critical in this whole thing is stewardship versus being like authoritarian. A steward is someone who helps to guide, and someone who really sees the asset of the people in the organization, and actually, in the way I believe in my faith, I'm a custodian of somebody else's asset. It must become greater, I must become less. Laying down my own rights. If I can put the needs of the culture, in this case our organization, above my own, I start to see myself as a steward, as a custodian, not as an authoritative dictator who says do it and you do it. And so how do you balance this idea of helping others to make decisions, embrace the best for the organization, allow people to feel like they're part of it without you pushing down in such a way that they're just waiting for you to backdoor micromanage their decisions? This has been some of the best work I've done in servant leadership, and that is to kind of basically spread out authority as it relates to belief in the mission and the culture. And so we win culture awards, and I think a lot of ways because of being a good steward, not an authoritarian who's like acting like an oppressive king. All of this, being a servant leader, is all about sustaining and building community. And I think if that's your last problem, if that's an organizational problem you have, I think it's the first six things. I think the payoff to good culture, good community, sustaining, is doing all the things we've talked about. And so I want to leave you with this. I think this is absolutely the key, the base foundation to a rock star culture is a servant leader. If servanthood, the doing the things for your team, is beneath you because of your title and who you think you've attained and what you've attained in your status, then leadership's going to be above you, and you're going to really struggle to build things that go beyond your shadow because your culture is going to be undermined. It's going to be competitive, not complementary. And so your leadership is going to fizzle out. If I could get you to do one thing today, it would be to pay attention to these 7 identifying areas on how to really embrace servant leadership in your organization.